Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Today, we're tackling a pivotal moment in Jewish history.
Mm-hmm.
That whole completion of the Hebrew Bible thing.
Right, but it's more than just dotting the I's and crossing the T's on a book. It's about this really dynamic clash of cultures and ideas that still resonate today, which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Okay, so set the stage for us. We're talking about the first century BCE, right? The Hebrew Bible, a collection of texts written over centuries, is finally being finalized. What's the context here? What's going on in the world as this is all happening?
Well, we can't ignore the impact of Alexander the Great. I mean, talk about a game changer. His conquests in the 4th century BCE, they weren't just about redrawing some borders. They spread Hellenism, the language, the art, the whole philosophical shebang of ancient Greece throughout the ancient world. And guess what? Judea got caught right in the middle of it.
So it's like this wave of Greek culture washing over everything.
Exactly. And it wasn't just a superficial thing like adopting a new fashion trend. This was a profound cultural shift. Think about it. Encountering new ways of thinking, new values, a whole new way of seeing the world.
Right, makes you wonder how Jewish communities dealt with this sudden influx of new ideas and cultural influences.
It was a real turning point. You see, on one hand, you have Hellenistic Judaism emerging, especially among Jews living outside Judea. Think Alexandria, Egypt, a real melting pot. They didn't shy away from Greek culture, they embraced it, weaving those elements into their Jewish practices and beliefs. It's like they found a way to blend it all together.
That's interesting, this fusion of culture. So it wasn't about abandoning their faith, but finding ways to make it work within this new Hellenistic world.
Precisely. They were adapting, creating a more, let's say, cosmopolitan expression of Judaism. But, and this is a big but, at the same time, you have groups like the Pharisees gaining prominence back in Judea. And their whole thing was like, hold up, not so fast. They were all about going back to the roots, about strictly upholding Jewish law. We're talking halakha, the nitty-gritty rules and practices that govern daily life.
So the Pharisees become like the guardians of tradition.
That's a good way to put it. They saw all this Hellenistic influence as, well, a threat. They were worried about assimilation, about losing their identity in this sea of Greek culture. So they doubled down on the Torah and oral traditions, seeing them as the anchors, the bedrock of Jewish life.
So you have this inherent tension playing out. Embrace the new or hold on to the old. It's like this fundamental question of how a culture navigates change. But wait, it wasn't just a two-sided debate, right? Weren't the Sadducees also a factor in all of this?
You're on it. You're right, we can't forget about the Sadducees. They add another layer of complexity to the whole shebang. They were more of an aristocratic bunch, more open to Hellenistic influence than the Pharisees, and their main focus was on the written Torah and the rituals of the temple in Jerusalem. They weren't so concerned with oral law and how it applied to daily life like the Pharisees.
Okay, so we've got all these different groups trying to figure out how to be Jewish in this new world, navigating this collision of cultures. It's like a recipe for some serious debate and disagreement. Can you give us an example of how these tensions played out on a more personal level, like with an actual individual?
Absolutely. Take Philo of Alexandria, for example. He's a Jewish philosopher living in the 1st century CE, right in the heart of Hellenistic Egypt. This guy is like the poster child for trying to bridge the gap between these seemingly different worlds, the Jewish world and the Greek world.
Oh, yeah. Philo. Didn't he try to connect the Torah with the philosophies of Plato and the Stoics? It's pretty ambitious.
Exactly. He was like, wait a minute, there's no need for a competition here. Philo saw Greek philosophy and Jewish scripture as two sides of the same coin. For him, they were different paths leading to the same destination. A deeper understanding of, let's say, the divine or the ultimate reality. He even went as far as reinterpreting parts of the Torah through the lens of Greek philosophy.
Wow, reinterpreting scripture. You have to wonder what the Pharisees back in Judea thought about that.
Let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled. They saw Philo's approach as a big no-no, like he was distorting Jewish tradition, straying from the straight and narrow. Remember, for them, this wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was about protecting their cultural and religious identity in a world where Hellenistic culture was everywhere.
It's like this constant push and pull, right? Trying to figure out how to engage with the world around you while holding on to your own traditions.
Yeah.
And speaking of engaging with the world, what about the Septuagint? That's got to be a big part of this story, this whole Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible.
Oh, absolutely. The Septuagint is huge. I mean, it throws a whole other wrench into this whole debate.
So give us the lowdown. What exactly are we talking about here, and why is it so significant in this whole saga?
Okay, so picture this. It's the 3rd century BCE. You're a Jew living in, say, Alexandria. Greek is like the lingua franca. It's what everyone's speaking in the streets, in the marketplace, even in the schools. But you've also got these sacred Hebrew texts that are a vital part of your faith.
So you're caught between two worlds in a way. You need to be
Oh.
able to navigate both.
Right. And that's where the Septuagint steps in. It's a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. Legend has it that it was the work of 70 scholars, hence the name Septuagint. With this translation, the scriptures became accessible to so many more people, especially those who didn't grow up speaking Hebrew.
That makes sense. It's like opening up this whole new world of knowledge and understanding. What's the catch? There's always a
Right.
catch, isn't there?
There's always a twist. Here's the thing. The Septuagint, it wasn't just a straight-up word-for-word translation. It was influenced by Hellenistic interpretations, colored by the whole cultural context in which it was created. Some passages were even tweaked a bit to line up better with Greek philosophical ideas.
Oh boy, I bet that didn't go over well back in Judea, especially with those Pharisees we were talking about.
You can say that again. Hellenistic Jews, they loved Septuagint, but the Pharisees back in Judea, not so much. They were worried, you see. They thought it might dilute the original Hebrew and bring in these foreign ideas that they were trying so hard to keep out.
It all comes back to that tension, doesn't it? That struggle between holding on to tradition and adapting to a changing world. It's a timeless dilemma.
It really is. The controversy over the Septuagint wasn't just about a translation, though. It was about authority, interpretation. Who gets to decide what the texts really mean? And how much flexibility do you allow when you encounter these new ideas, these different ways of seeing the world?
Big questions, and ones that we're still grappling with today, right?
Mm.
Think about all the debates within different religious communities over the interpretation of Scripture.
Oh, absolutely. This ancient debate is still very much alive and well. It's this constant dance between the old and the new. And speaking of recurring themes, we see this same tension pop up again centuries later with a guy named Maimonides.
Maimonides. Wait, wasn't he the scholar who tried to reconcile Jewish thought with, if I'm remembering correctly, Greek philosophy? Some things never change, do they?
You got it. Some questions are timeless, but in Maimonides' case, there was even more at stake.
In what way?
Well, here you have this major figure in Jewish scholarship, a master of Jewish law and tradition, who also happened to be fascinated by Aristotle's ideas, and not just casually interested either. Maimonides was digging deep into Aristotelian thought and, wrestling with what it meant for his own faith.
That takes some serious guts.
It does. And out of this intellectual struggle came his masterpiece guide for the perplexed. And let me tell you, it's a book that still gets people riled up today.
So what was Maimonides' ultimate goal with this book? What was he trying to achieve?
He was attempting something incredibly ambitious. He was trying to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Jewish theology. Can you imagine?
Trying to bring Aristotle and Jewish theology together? That's quite a challenge. How do you even begin to find common ground between those two?
Well, Maimonides started with a pretty radical idea. Reason and faith, they're not opposed to each other. They can actually coexist, even complement each other. He believed that God is the source of both revelation, as we find in Scripture, and reason, which is what philosophers like Aristotle were exploring.
So it's not an either situation. You don't have to choose between faith or reason.
Exactly. In fact, Maimonides argued that by using reason with some guidance from thinkers like Aristotle, we can come to a deeper, more profound understanding of God and the universe. He saw them as working together.
That's fascinating. Did he give any specific examples of how this whole faith meets reason idea actually plays out?
He did. One of the most well-known and controversial examples has to do with his interpretation of God.
Oh, God. Always a hot topic.
Yeah.
What was Maimonides' take on it?
Well, he drew on Aristotle's concept of the prime mover, this eternal, unchanging force that sets the universe in motion. And he said that God is purely intellectual, an eternal mind, unchanging.
So none of those images of God with human-like qualities.
Right. He rejected those literal interpretations of the Hebrew Bible that describe God in those anthropomorphic ways, like having hands or a face. Maimonides said those were metaphors, ways to make the divine a little easier for us finite humans to grasp. But for him, God was pure thought, pure intellect.
It's amazing how Maimonides, living centuries after Philo, is still wrestling with this same basic tension, how to stay true to his Jewish faith while engaging with Greek philosophical thought. It's like a tale as old as time.
It really is. But Philo and Maimonides show us that there's real value in grappling with these big questions, even the ones that seem to challenge our beliefs. It can lead to some profound insights.
So as we wrap up our deep dive here, What's the main takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
First, I think it's essential to remember that the completion of the Hebrew Bible wasn't just about, like, collecting scrolls and putting them in order. It was about defining Jewish identity in a world that had been totally transformed by Hellenism, and figuring out how to navigate that cultural influence, how to hold on to tradition while engaging with the new. That wasn't just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing challenge, and it's just as relevant today as it was back then.
We see that so clearly in the stories of Philo and Maimonides, right? They both tried to bridge that gap between their Jewish faith and Greek philosophy.
Exactly. It's this constant push and pull between tradition and change, and it's woven into the fabric of Judaism. And honestly, it's something that every culture grapples with, right? How do we hold on to what's important while also evolving?
It's a good reminder that texts, even sacred texts, aren't set in stone. They're constantly being interpreted and reinterpreted, seen through the lens of the time and the individual.
And that's maybe the most crucial point for listeners to take with them. How do we approach our own beliefs, our own traditions, in a world that's bursting with different perspectives and ideas? How do we talk to each other, even when we disagree about these big questions? These are tough questions, but they're so important.
They really are. And as we've seen with Philo and Maimonides, wrestling with those tough questions can lead to some pretty amazing discoveries about ourselves and the world.
No doubt about it. It's a journey worth taking.
It really is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time.